Good evening, everyone. My name is Nasser Rabat. I'm the director of the Aga Khan Program. Everyone knows that, so I don't know why I'm repeating it here in this room since I know all of you. Thank you for being here for our first lecture of the semester in the Aga Khan Program, an evening with lecture series. I just came back from something called MIT Human Insight Collaborative Lunch. But the Insight Collaborative and the whole thing, MIT Human Insight Collaborative stands, ultimately the acronym that they're using is MYTHIC. I don't know if any of them, there were like 200 people in 10-250. I don't know if any of them actually have noticed that MYTHIC is what they are dealing with in here. It's an attempt at MIT to bring the humanities and social sciences to science and technology. And it's about time, in a way. I mean, having been here for 40 years, I've been waiting for a moment like this one, where MIT will acknowledge that the social sciences and the humanities have a place in their push towards a future of some kind. So it is really quite a coincidence that our lecture tonight is one such step of how humanities, social sciences, a mixture of both, and in a sense, design, as we think of design as something that is distinct from the two, can and should be very much involved in thinking about the future and in basically learning from the past and bringing that learning into applications to the future. And Safouan is one of these people who are doing that. As a matter of fact, actually, we are blessed with postdocs this year who are all thinking about the future in their own way. So that's perhaps actually an indication that the Aga Khan Program is on the tip of this tide that is now spreading at MIT. I hope we can take advantage of that. Before I present Safouan in his lecture, I want to tell you about what's in store for us in the Aga Khan Program. We have one other lecture this semester on November 18th by Zainab Bahrani, who's the professor and chair of the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia University. The title of her talk is The Mosul Gate at Amidia Towards an Archaeology of Preservation and Counter-Narratives of the Past. Again, along the same kind of thinking of bringing narrative into arguments with the way we thought about the narratives that are being developed by our scholars now, into ways of questioning how we thought of the past, how the past was projected for us. In the same vein, I am a co-curator of a show that I hope all of you will have a 5-minute to go and see it, at the Mayhugan Gallery here in our building 14N, or otherwise the Humanities Library building. And it's called Out of Antiquity, the Dead Cities in Syria and Their Islamic Architectural Legacy. It is co-curated by me and Francesca Leoni, who is a graduate of our program and who is currently a professor at RISD. And the models are made by El Sharif Kabashi, one of our MArch students who is really gifted in everything to deal with 3D production, whatever those are, models or prints. That brings me to our today's lecture. Safouan Azouzi is a design researcher and designer. I think actually this is a way of saying he's an architect, but he no longer wants to call himself an architect, because now designer is sort of like some sort of a wider form of or more encompassing, who completed his PhD in design at Sapienza University in Rome in 2022 at the Department of Planning, Design, and Technology of Architecture. His research focuses on design for social innovation, with a specific emphasis on perspectives from the Global South and decolonial thinking. And his very specific emphasis is on a set of oases in the south of Tunisia. So his work, as a matter of fact, actually tells us or proves to us the possibility of starting from the small and being able to look at the large, at the global, and perhaps actually at problems that are much larger than what the specific example of the oasis are facing, but the solutions and the ideas that he's getting from his study of the oasis do have global implications. Operating at the convergence of social and political design, future thinking, participatory action research, and ecological transition, he delves into the concept of the commons, something that I'm so eager to listen to and hear about, and explore the role of participatory design and community economies in reviving ancient indigenous oasis practices around commoning in Tunisia and the Maghreb region. Before coming to us as a postdoctoral fellow here, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, so he is probably known to most of us now. Safouan has published 2 articles that I know of, at least the ones that he shared with me, since his graduation in 2022 with Loredana De Lucio. One is called Design After the Anthropocene, and I like the title. I haven't read the article yet. And the other article is one of these architectural titles, Design as/for Common, between parentheses, Commons, Decolonial Participatory Experience for Post-Capitalist Resilient Futures. And this came in 2023. The first one came out in 2024. His talk today, Learning from Nefzawa, Design in Recultivating Common Practices in Oasis, addresses the multifaceted challenges confronting the eco-social landscapes of Tunisia's Nefzawa oasis, focusing on the interplay of historical, environmental, and socio-economic dynamics, drawing on ethnographic research, and you can see in here sort of like the breadth of his interest in various fields, literature reviews, and Earth observation data. The talk critically examines the unsustainable exploitation of natural resources exacerbated by climate change and ongoing land and water dispossession. The talk challenges the view of the oasis solely as a site of agricultural production, overlooking its essence and its evolution around commons, that social principle which sustains its economic and social fabric. The talk also explores pathways for adaptation in the face of potential collapse of these agroecosystems. Really, Rafat, you should talk to Safouan, and Safouan should talk to you after our talk today. Yeah. Highlighting the role of design in envisioning alternative socio-economic models for a socially and ecologically sustainable future. The talk emphasizes the importance of remembrance and adapting ancient oasis common practices, proposing oasis connectivity and smart oasis as framework for integrating traditional common practices with modern technology to enhance community resilience and biodiversity conservation. I wish Sally Kornbluth was with us here after her talk just 2 hours ago, which actually this addresses many of them. Welcome. And
so I'm gonna try to go directly to the point. That's what Uma told me to do. And so what is Nefzawa and where is it located and how did I come to work on it? And Nefzawa, now part of Gili Governorate in the southwest of Tunisia, refers to both a region and a major Berber tribe, the Nefzawan, from the Luata group, which was common in Cyrenaica, Libya, until to the western part of Egypt during Roman times. And here you can see a map from John Mattingly, the archaeologist, who tells us that Nefzawa oases were a key center for the Nibjeni group, likely part of the Regio Arzugitana in late antiquity. So it's a part of the Roman Empire in North Africa. This group were involved in the Takfaranian revolt, a major rebellion of Berber tribes in 1780. After which their territory was surveyed and delimited by the Romans in 29 AD. So they are part of the Numidian population known for horse breeding, living off flesh and milk. The only manufacturer connected with their name was that of purple dye. And modern nomadic groups in the area are likely descendant of these populations. So you can see in yellow dots all the old oases that existed, and in black dots the one that remain in the region, the major ones. And here there is a focus on the southwest of Tunisia. So on the top left, you can see the Jreed region, and on the right, you see the Nefzawa region. The greenery is the modern time greenery. So you see all of these are palm groves, and the little dots are the old oases. And actually, the main city was Tilmin in the region, recognized as a civitas town by Rome. So it's a city or community that held certain legal privileges and status during the Flavian period, and later became a municipio. So it's a self-governing city with the status of a Roman municipality. So it was a quite important part of the Roman Empire, and the old name was Turis Tamellini, and today almost no traces of the city of Nefzawa remain. So there was a city called Nefzawa, so it's both a tribe and a city and a region, and it was located around 3 kilometers southeast of Kibili city. In the 16th century, with Ottoman rule, the ancient city of Kibili was established. When Abdullah ibn Buzayd al-Mahmoudi al-Tarabulsi became governor of Nefzawa. So I'm not a historian, just knew these details reading some books, but I'm not an accurate, like I'm not the expert on in the question, but what I read is that after moving from Bishri to Nefzawa, tensions arose with Abdullah's sons, with the locals, and they killed him. So Muhammad ibn Abdul Mu'min al-Mahmoudi Tarabulsi went there and destroyed completely the city. So we don't have any traces of it. And the geographer Muhammad ibn Abdul Mu'min al-Hamiri, in his book Al-Rawd al-Ma'tar fi Akhbar al-Aqtar, so the fragrant garden in the news of the regions, tells us about this. And one big famous name that from the region is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Umar al-Nefzawi, that Rafat works on, I discovered. So we call him we call him Sheikh al-Nefzawi, and Sheikh al-Nefzawi is famous for his Al-Rawd al-Atir fi Nuzhat al-Khatir. So one is Al-Rawd al-Ma'tar and the other one is Al-Rawd al-Atir. But the often referred as the Arabic Kama Sutra. And he comes from the Oasis. And
that Nefzawi.
yeah, that Nefzawi. So, but why Nefzawa? And I think we could start with Martinez Alier concept of environmentalism of the poor. So the Spanish economist uses it to describe how marginalized communities resist environmental degradation and exploitation, often defending their livelihoods and ecosystems against extractive industries. And over the past decade, in Tunisia, protest episodes originated from the margins of the country. And social movements has intensified, and many of these movements are around the resistance to the plundering of the subterranean resources, the despoliation of their land, the invasive destruction of their environment, and the loss of their livelihood. So it's exactly what Martinez Alier is talking about. And Diane Robert talks about the beginning of a political ecology in Tunisia with the rise of these environmentalist movement fighting for their livelihood. So social and ecological are merged in one unique thing. And these would lead to inevitable ecological distribution, like we will have like many conflicts in the region, especially in the south of Tunisia. And here you can see, for example, El Kamour in the south, extreme south of Tunisia, Tatooine region, the Tatooine of Star Wars. So there have been protests regarding the control of mining and oil resources, and the claims of the population focus on the use of resources and repartition of profits. And the campaign was "Win or Petrol, where is oil?" And it's quite famous in Tunisia. And other protests regarding industrial pollution in Gebes, Oasis, and the question of land in Jemna, in Nefzawa. We come back to Nefzawa. Actually, I come from an oasis, from Gebes, and that's the why, the personal why. The second why, oasis, is that during my PhD, I focus on the idea of design and commons. And I read about permaculture, designed agriculture. So this biologist Bill Mollison read the book of Victor Papanek, considered as the father of eco-social design. And after reading the book Design for the Real World, he wrote this book on permaculture and defines it as designed agriculture. Not in the introduction, he writes, this is not a gardening book, this is a design book. And I was excited about it. And I read also about Ostrom, the Nobel Prize in Economy, about governing the commons. And the question was, is there a design in commons or for commons? And I was excited about this and talked about it to my grandmother. Now Gareth knows about it. I was happy about this permaculture thing and commoning. And my grandmother told me, you don't need the Nobel Prize to talk about the commons because we used to do it, live in that manner. And permaculture is only a fancy word to describe how agriculture is done in the oasis. So commons are a rich historical and cultural heritage in the oasis. And it's not only about common poor resources, it's about commoning as a relationality. And that's what commons scholars are talking about now during the 5-6 last years. For example, here you can see Tozer, you can see all the canals, the seguias, that are canals distributing the water. So there is an input of water from the top left, you can see. So this is the beginning of the oasis where water comes in the area and then it's distributed between the different plots. And you have also the output of salty water because they need to wash the land because the land is quite salty, and it goes into drains in dots. That's what you see. And so let's say what was interesting for me was knowing more about the history of this commoning thing in the oasis. And that's where when I went to the oasis and did ethnography interviews, met elders talking about all these techniques and practices that are disappearing. And so for millennia, people adopted a complex social organization of solidarity and commoning around water and beyond, like I said. And For example, from the 11th century, Sheikh Abu al-Abbas ibn Bakr al-Farastai al-Nufusi. Nufusi is from Libya, I think. But from the 11th century, he wrote this book, Al-Qisma wa Usul al-Ardain. And would be introduced to the division of and origins of the two lands. So it's a book in the jurisprudence of Islamic architecture and speaks specifically in its second chapter about the division of commons, al-mushah. And commons here are defined as things related to land, water, trees, etc., but not animals and not all kinds of revenues. So it follows Islamic fiqh to solve issues around water and urbanism. I was convinced that waqf was a common. It is not. It could be a common, but it's not 100% common. Al-Mushah is the common. And another person from Tawzir, from this city actually, is Ibn Shabbat at-Tawziri. And Ibn Shabbat wrote a Risala fil Handasa, treatise in engineering, and he explains his theory on water distribution in this book. And it's known the three-parted division and this division of water was known from Roman time, but he developed it, and his merits lies in reviving a distribution system that now reaches the irrigation of all gardens of Tawzir. So you also have this 3 layers agriculture to maintain the moisture, what locals call thra. Thra is thara in Arabic, means richness. So locals in their daily life, they don't call an oasis waha, the Arabic word for it, it's ghaba. Ghaba is forest. And it reminds me of what permaculturists, they talk about food forests for the future. So that's exactly what an oasis is. And my grandmother was right. So these 3 layers maintain moisture because evapotranspiration goes from the veggies level to the fruit trees level, and then the shade of the palm tree maintains that moisture that it's a closed circle. And beyond romanticism and essentialism, they are artificial, anthropized, cultivated spaces in arid zones. So there is no natural oasis. It's all human built environments. And Pliny the Elder talks about this, and we're talking about like early antiquity. I can read the passage. So he talks about Gebes, Takape. One meets when one goes to the Syrtis and to Leptis the Great, the city of Africa in the middle of the sands. It's called Takape. The soil which is watered there enjoys a marvelous fertility in a space of about 3,000 steps in all directions. A spring flows there abundant, it is true, but whose water are distributed to the inhabitants during a fixed numbers of hours. There, under a very high palm tree, grows an olive tree, under the olive tree, a fig tree, under the fig tree, a pomegranate tree, under the pomegranate, a vine, under the vine, wheat is sown, then vegetables, herbs, all in the same year, all growing in the shade of each other. So I think it concentrates all the idea of water distribution, commoning, and the 3-layer agriculture system. And this was maintained after the Islamic Futuhat, and Muhammad Abdullah ibn Muhammad Tijani in his Rihlat al-Tijani describes the fruits he found in Nefzawa, saying there are quinces there which are rare in all regions and merchant or nearly so in their delicious taste, large size, abundant water, and pure clarity. He also describes the oasis of Tozer and the distribution of water system. There is no forest in the land of Jrid larger than it or with more water. Its water originates from springs that flow from the sand and gather outside the town in vast valley branching into many streams. Each of these streams has channels that are divided among them based on their designated water rights. So when I went there, I was convinced that commons were common poor resources, and that it was related only to water as a resource. And then I discovered many other practices. So, for example, Jahirat al-Wad, that is, they call it Jahirat al-Wad. So it's like cleaning of the wadi bed, and it's one gathering like once a year before the monsoon. The locals would meet and clean the bed of the river from an oasis to another in Gebes, and each community is hosting the other, and they would gather at the end at Ras La'yun, the origin of the sources, and to rebuild the falling dam. They call it the falling dam because it has to fall. It needs to fall when monsoon comes, so the oasis isn't overflowed, and it maintains the social fabric between three different communities, separate communities in three different oases. And I discovered also about the ragata. So if I am gathering my fruit, all my neighbors would gather and do it with me. And then if my neighbor is building his fence, we would gather and build his fence with him. And other practices like kholeta, it's like khalat, it's mixing. So it's about dividing meat because meat is expensive. So they would slaughter a beef, for example, and divide it evenly. So I focused on the case of Jemna because Jemna is labeled as the oasis of the revolution. The Tunisian sociologist Mohamed Kero that I met and had extensive discussion with him, he considers Jemna as a microcosm of the Tunisian revolution. So understanding what happened in Jemna helps understanding what's happening or what happened during the Tunisian revolution. And in Jemna, the protests centered on land issues. So from peasants, dispossession during colonization, and government annexation post-independence. So there is a land that locals consider their land, and during colonization, this was called Hinshir al-Mu'ammar, the colonial land or something like this. Hinshir al-Mu'ammar. How do you translate this? Hinshir al-Mu'ammar. I don't know. But then Jemnians during the revolution took back their ancestral land, and they didn't know how to divide the land. So actually they said, okay, it's a common. And that was the first, let's say, land commoning experiment post-revolution. And Ben Slimane talks about contested commons because the state refused this idea of land commoning, saying there is no legal framework for it. And actually, there was a long fight for 10 years between the central state and the association that runs the experiment. And at the end, it gave birth to the new law on social solidarity economy. But for Kerru, the quasi-social movement, he calls it a quasi-social movement, didn't really work out. So it stayed an experiment that never became a project. And that was interesting for me. That's why I went there to understand why. And this is a map provided by the association. You can see Oasis Muhammad there. That's the land that they are commenting. But then I discovered that there are like 8 other oases. They call it oasis, but they are palm groves, like monoculture of palm groves of one kind, one variety of palm trees. And I understood that the scale was too big. And so how can I say? I was there meeting the municipality officials, the Ministry of Agriculture officials, activists, farmers, and actually one farmer told me we are no longer farmer, we are date producers. Because I noticed that in all of these green areas, no one is producing veggies, no one is producing fruits. It's only date palms. And how can I say, the tension, I noticed that there were tensions between localities. So from here and here, there were fights against resources in Jemna and Al-Qal'a, also in Jemna and Nuail here. Like there are conflict zones, and there is a need for another perspective. And I also understood that the Tunisian oases in general are on the verge of collapse, but especially in Nefzawa. So what's happening in Nefzawa is that the water table is going down by 3 to 5 meters every year, and we passed from water commoning to water contest. And the Ministry of Agriculture now of the Environment, Tunisian one, is recognizing that without a real intervention, we're talking about collapse in 2030s. And this is the water table I'm talking about. In blue, you can see the complex terminal in French, the terminal complex. And in red, the intercalary continental, that these are both in common between the 3 countries, Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria. They actually signed a contract, like something not to use the water, but they're all doing it, especially Algeria on the borders with Tunisia in El Wed locality. And so practically the Tunisian central state is closing an eye on what we call the illicit extensions. I will talk about this. Here you can see land cover vulnerability to change in 2050. So what's in light yellow is where there is more vulnerability and damages happening. And you can see, especially in Zawa and Jrid, around the Oasis region, it's really yellow. And this is due to climate change. And you can see the evolution of the average annual temperatures in Tunisia. So it's like 3 to 5 degrees more in less than 20, 30 years, and a loss of also precipitations in the region, especially in Ubelli. And what I noticed is this is widely discussed in academia. So it's about accelerated desertification, intensive monoculture. So we have biological uniformity and diseases. Here, actually, I can show you a photo. So this infinite sea of palm trees is this one, only this one. And I was here taking the photo. And when you go on the route, so I was living in Duz because I couldn't stay in Jemna, and we have like 30 kilometers from Gbeli to Duz, and I was going from Duz to Jemna and Jemna to Gbeli and back. And what I noticed is it's the same module. So it's the same pattern repeating itself from a locality to another. And each locality is saying they're different from the other, but they're all part of Nefzawa, and they share the same history, regional history. So salinization, soil erosion, and the use of new hydraulic systems that disrupted everything. So here you can see tubes. Like these scenes are on a daily basis. You could see these tubes and pipelines arriving every day, and people would buy this and go to the fields and go down deeper and deeper because everyone is pumping from the same water resource, and it's going, like I said, on a really fast pace. They are using, so poor farmers are using gas oil. Rich, wealthy farmers are using, date producers, sorry, are using solar panels, and they use it especially around noon. That is an ecological absurdity because 45 to 50% of the water is evaporating around noon, but they call it the peak hour. So the peak hour is interesting for them because the solar panel is really, really efficient in that, around that hour. And you can see that they are no longer using segia or the old canals, and they're using pipelines. And this is the output. So you can see the saline water discharge after irrigating the plots. And all of this water, it's a huge amount of water. You can see a wadi, it's a river, and you have two of this around following the highway. And this is a state-owned deep water pump that is broken now for 5 years. So the same place I showed you, that Tilet 1, the infant sea of palm trees, is actually dying because the state is no longer pumping the deep water from like, I don't know, like 2,000 to 3,000 meters deep. And so this disrupted everything, and you can see that they abandoned the ancient settlement. This is the old city of Belli, and are building ill-suited houses, and now they need air conditioning. They want big windows. They want balconies, which is an absurdity in the middle of the desert. But this is the Eurocentric imagery of architecture and building urban design. And it's all about, so whenever we focus on oases, we focus on the environmental level or the agricultural level, the food production, and we overlook the socio-economical aspect of it. The thing is, when French came in, they introduced private property, and they introduced pumping technology. And that's when everything began. But you can see, for example, this is a photo from 1984. So actually, the big change happened in this late 70s, beginning of the 80s, with the modern independent Tunisian state that continued the same, proceeded with the same politics and policies and the Oases. So here in really dark green, you can see the old traditional Oasis. And then this is 1999, these illicit extensions. And then this is 2020, actually. And one can say, we're greening the desert. It's a positive thing. But actually, you have a zoom on Jemna, for example, you can see these are state-owned initiatives. These squarey plots, and these are in a way dispossessing locals from the water gathering. So when French came in, like I said, they made these new extensions. You can see it here. So you had old Zira. Zira is a jazira in Arabic. Jazira, these are like natural water going up and forming these islands of greenery, and each tribe would have its own zira. And then French came in and they made this new extension with pumping techniques, and you had the water table going down and less ziras and people gathering around this oasis. And what they did is they maintained in a way this idea of water distribution, but put in place a state representative that is distributing the water, and locals would pay for it. And from there, with a modern state after independence, the state did the same. So he did the Henshilla Muhammad, he did this one, and that one is a private initiative, but always with the idea of distributing water. And then we had these, this extreme, let's say, reaction to it is locals going and digging their own wells. And these were the illicit extensions I was talking about, that you can see here. So the main thing I noticed here, for example, this is the old French oasis in Jemna that they call it the old oasis, but it's not even the old one. And now it's abandoned, and they're only maintaining it because they say ardak ardak, your dignity is in your land. So it's about remembering about their ancestors and fathers, etc. But it's nearly abandoned. And here, for example, you see a state-owned oasis with the water distribution that is made by a state representative. But don't imagine that farmers are in this one and not in the other one. So a farmer like me would have a land in here and his own personal extension like this one. And then he would have also a part of the lands that are in common and managed by the association. So here you can see a schematic representation of the evolution of Nefzawa. And for me, as a designer, there is a need for a design approach. Then I worked with Gareth last year and discovered about landscape design. And that's when I understood that there is a need for a landscape design approach to understand the whole thing. So there are classification issues when we talk about oasis. So there are mountain oases in Gafsa, for example, there up north. There are littoral oases like in Oases, or there are Saharan oases like in Tajrid or Nefzawa. And this is a geographic distinction. We can also, you can see the footprint of it, and you can see the mountains here. So what's happening is that phosphate is extracted from the mountains of Gafsa and then transported to Gebes, to this big port. This is the biggest chemical group in Tunisia and North Africa, and they're producing, actually they're transforming the phosphate extracted from Gafsa into chemical fertilizers. So they're pumping the water, and there is no water in there, so it's like surviving. The oasis is surviving, and they're like also throwing 18,000 tons of phosphogyps every day in the sea, and they're also polluting the air with what we call bachara. It's sulfur, yeah. And so if it's not chemical industries or mining, in the case of Jemena, it's agro-industry. In the case of the Jreed, it's tourism that is dispossessing locals from the water resource. And we can also talk about the hydrogeomorphological distinction. So we have, like, I talk about the zira, this water going naturally up, but Gabs, for example, is that model of the sources in surface, but you can also have Gafsa, that is a fogara, so it's a canal from these traditional ancient gathering techniques. There is no water, there is no water pumping, it's going naturally, and they take it from the Jebel, the mountain, with a long canal with these holes to control the water flow, and goes until to the oasis. And you can see the route. This is the routes. It's practically a crater. Locals would remove the sand until finding the water, and they planting directly the country in it. And these are the last routes in Duz and Nefzawa. So this is a photo from 2004. So Fogara in Tunisia is called Kharriga. In Morocco is called Khattara, but it's the same technique. You can see the holes here. And here you can see the last zira of Nefzawa in the middle of all these modern extensions. And this is already dead zira. And we also have another kind of classification that is mostly used by the state, traditional versus modern. So whenever we talk about oasis, it's about heritage conservation or production. I'm almost done. So you can see that there is a footprint. This is the landscape design perspective in a way. There is the same footprint of these oases. This is Nafta in the Jreed. This is Dozer in the Jreed. So the water flows and then it's distributed and you can see it. And because the resource is scarce, the limits are well defined. And then you have these modern extensions. In Jemena, we never had this. We never had this pattern. We had ziras. It's a different one. But you can see the dead ziras. These are the holes, and you can see all the modern extensions around it, in a way, from a satellite. And here comes design. Why am I talking about all of this? Like I said, I got interested into commons because my original question was, what design in the Anthropocene? And I read about meadows. Here he was at the MIT actually, talks about the limits to growth and develop different scenarios that all end with a collapse actually. And that's what's happening in the oasis. Oases are already collapsing, and I consider oasis as a microcosm of all of the issues that the IPCC is talking about, or Meadows is talking about. And what we need, like Scranton says, we're gonna need new ways of thinking about the collective existence. And that's what commons and commoning is about. I found myself dealing with the question because I started doing design for social innovation. Design for social innovation is about helping marginal communities that neither the state or the private sector, the market, is really helping to include them. And I was fed up with this idea of helping, the helper and the helped. And this, say, neo-colonial perspective of the practice of design. And my question was, is there a social design from the South that is not humanitarian, like not helping? And that's when I found myself classifying alternative movements in design, but also connecting them with these movements, social movements, eco-social movements that are already in the perspective of collapse. So in green, these are movements around the world that are already accepting the idea of the Anthropocene and collapse. And accepting it helps us design differently. So it's not an event that is gonna happen, it's already happened, and we are already dealing with it. And so we find permaculture, community-supported agriculture movement, slow food, degrowth, transition town network that inspired transition design theory. And in the South, we have food sovereignty movement with Via Campesina. We have like the Buen Vivir that is inspired by local Indian philosophy. And in India, for example, we have also the Eco-Swaraj movement. It's a radical ecological democracy movement with the farmers. And Escobar, the anthropologist, links all these movements, and he says the commons and commoning is actually the link between all of this. And so my question was, how can design help in shifting paradigms from an extractivist growth economy to a resource economy? And like I said, originally commons are considered as common pool resources. We also have a second definition of it as new commons or creative commons licenses. So it's related to the rise of internet, but also there is a commons as activist political understanding, and it's about alternative ways of living in a non-capitalist system. So I take this third definition of commons, got interested into the work of Gibson Graham on community economies that considered that all of what you see under the water is actually commoning and community economies, and it's way beyond the classical understanding of economy as wage labor into a market. And this is what I discovered about life in the Oases for centuries. And we shouldn't be nostalgic about the Oasis because the whole economy of it was around slavery also, and it wasn't an equitable, just system, but commoning was in the middle of the social fabric. So how can we pass from these social movements in Tunisia, from the revendication, like El Kamour, they just stopped the vans, the pipelines, destroyed the pipelines. In Gebis, they closed the port. In Gafsa, they closed the industries in there. But it's never about designing, prefiguring, imagining alternatives. It's always about revendicating. So my question is there something for designers in there? And Escobar talks about autonomous design. So this idea of autonomous design of the designer from the global South going to support the struggles of groups grassroots movements or subaltern communities to reconstruct the communal. That's what he says. And I like the idea. And for me, can we think about Nefzawa as a cosmopolitan localism scenario? So what cosmopolitan localism is, it's about mutually supported communities that are interconnected. So the idea of cosmopolitan localism is Sachs who talks about this. If we need to adapt, he thinks that we need to shrink down, to relocalize the economy, and to work on the connectivity of this. And what I like about this is that's exactly what oases are about. Battesti, he's a geographer, he talks about the concept of oasis connectivity. So it's an hyperproductive node in a network. That's what an oasis is. And the idea of the oasis as an island in the middle of the desert, of a sea of sand, is a colonial idea. The idea of the postcards of the oasis as a place to relax is a colonial idea. It's a colonial oblivion, and it's a place of struggle. It's a hyper-productive place, and trade is an essential part of it. And he defines oasis as eco-social landscapes. This is thanks to Gareth, who told me about this. It's both ecological and social landscape. So the dichotomy of modern versus traditional, or this geographic distinction, or all of this doesn't work. So he considers the palm grove as the green part of the oasis. That's it's monoculture, or it's a three-layered agriculture, or it's the palm grove, it's the greenery that is connected to the settlement, ancient settlement, modern city, village. So the combination of the settlement and the palm grove creates an oasis. So if we think about this, then Nefzawa is one big oasis of 57,000 hectares. And commons didn't disappear at all in Nefzawa. I remember this discussion I had with this shepherd. I wanted to convince him to, I don't know, like transform his milk into cheese and sell it. And for him, this was a shame, because in the desert you cannot sell water, you cannot sell milk, you cannot sell fire. And so even if we are into contested commons or a race for water, commons are still in there, in the local imaginary. And you can see this idea of connectivity. These are the old roots, these are the new roots, quite the same in a way. And these are now used by smugglers for trafficking of irregular migrants going to Europe. But what you can see is you can have an oasis. You cannot have an oasis with no water, but you can have water with no oasis in the desert. You can have water and palm trees and no oasis in there. So what's interesting is that oases are always in the intersection of roots, and then they bring water from far away, like in the case of the Kharriga Foggara system, the old one. So what I'm claiming for is, from a landscape perspective, Nefzawa became as one green expanse of interconnected oases, and that we can think about alternatives by thinking about relocalizing the economy, rebuilding the three layers, but also maybe when I met local researchers from the Institute of Arid Regions, they were talking about IoT solutions. And that's why I'm here at the MIT, about smart cards and smart ways of thinking the distribution of the resource. But then no one thought about commons and commoning. So it's both the combination of this idea of connectivity, reclaiming, but also the reclaiming of commons that would actually help think about alternatives for the region. And I started doing workshops in there, but then with COVID, I was cut off. But the idea is to create this new sense of place, do it through participatory design, creating this sharing space between the deciders, the local communities, and the activists and the researchers, but through the lens of commoning and connectivity. This, I think, would be the right way to go. And that's it. Yeah, that's.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll let you take your own questions.
Sorry, it was long.
So, thank you for a very thorough presentation. I have a very simple question out of my ignorance, but you said towards the end that oases were more about economic, colonial construct. So,
Oh,
elaborate.
I think okay. Then I think you got me wrong. I explained maybe not clearly the idea. So you have old oases, you have like traditional oasis, and then you have modern ones. The modern ones are
I got this.
Yeah.
Right, but you said something about postcards and this culture of having this retreat in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
If you can elaborate on how this perhaps orientalist depiction of an oasis in the middle of the Arabian desert was used through the colonial.
So what I know is whenever I search for materials about the oasis, what I found is postcards, a lot of postcards, and all of them showing like greenery, wadi, water, and these indigenous populations in there as them. So it was a way for French colons in Tunisia to interact with their families back in, for example, in France. And what you have from the desert is that idea. What's interesting for me is the independent Tunisia continued with the same representation of the ways of our tourism. For example, it's all about dunes and palm trees and camels. That's how we sell ourselves. That's how we sell the idea of doing tourism in Tunisia. So it's completely opposed to the real life of Asian communities. Because if you, for example, don't work the land for a couple of days, desert is taking it back. So it's a continuous struggle, and it's not a place to relax. But that's the idea that they had when they came in. And when they came in, also they closed the borders. So they considered the oasis as a self-sufficient island of greenery. And this is the first mistake. And they also closed borders. So they broke the networks between the oases. And this idea of autonomy or self-sufficiency of the oasis made them press locals for productivity. Like, you need to produce more. And that's when they started with the pumping and the monoculture and the uses of fertilizers. But they also considered the old oases as fragile ecosystems that are not productive enough. And that's when they got into these apparently abundant, like virgin lands that are tribal land, common land, and they created these new extensions of monoculture. And that's when they thought about the distance between each palm tree. So we need to have 10 meters between each palm tree. So you have like 100 in each, and you produce blah, blah, blah. So it's all about productivity and export. And the kind of date they chose, the Glitnur, we are the 4th exporter of the Glitnur in the world. And that wasn't the best kind of date. It was the easiest to stock and the easiest to transport. That's why they chose to use this kind of breed, both in Algeria and Tunisia. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to soil salinity and how soil salinity factors into this. Like, when you talk about monoculture, I know that the date palm is really hardy against soil salinity, and I don't really know the case in Tunisia very well, but I know that that's kind of been an impulse for date palm in Oman, is just like soil so salty.
I know that soils are salty, have been salty for decades, centuries. It's the kind of sandy terrain they're working on. That's why they imagined this system of irrigation that they call it washing. So they distributing the water and then they overflow the plots, and the overflow of water that drains and washes the land goes with the salt in it and goes into the drains. And what's happening with modernization now is that these drains are no longer used. The farmer wants 1 meter or 2 meters more in his plot, so he's submerging, like he's putting land, like he's covering the drain to plant another tree or something. What's happening is the salt goes up. They call it barango in local dialect. So the salt goes up, like in the photo I showed you. So, but if you do wash your land and use the drains, if your neighbor doesn't do that, you will have salt in your land also. So that's the interdependence between the neighbors. For example, in the old traditional oasis. In the modern ones, they continue strangely to overflow the land, even if they don't have the 3 layers. They only have a pantry. So they could do precision agriculture, for example, and avoid like losing all that water. But because of salt, they do it. So I cannot explain exactly the physical aspect of it. I don't know about this, but I know that salinization is a real issue. For example, in Gavis, seawater is going into the aquifer. That's why, for example. In Nefzawa, it's the Shat al-Jarid, the big shot in there, Sabkha. I think it's connected in a way to this, but then I cannot explain physically why.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think sort of like you touched on part of the issue with the idea of commenting within like neoliberal economic policy. It's this idea that they sort of lead to just like free for all, you know. To be untrue, but I think, you know, often within these systems, there is understanding of like resource ownership. And sense of like responsibility and sort of governance systems for managing those resources. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit in this context about how like the idea of like ownership of water resources, for example, is sort of understood and communicated, and how the responsibility of managing those resources is understood.
Now I can get into it. Yes. Actually, before colonization, they would have Gay del Wad, the water chief, that is elected in a way, chosen. And for example, in the case of Geddes, my hometown, there are 3 different oases, with each oasis having a different Gay del Wad, the water chief. But then the 3 water chiefs would have a boss that is the biggest landowner of the 3 oases. So who has the biggest land is the, let's say, the big decider, but he's only called when they have issues. So when the water chief cannot solve a problem between 2 neighbors, then they would call for that figure. And he would come, solve the problem, and the one who is considered as the faulty person would pay the boss, the big boss, for his disturbance, let's say. But then it wasn't always fair, because you had, like I said, slavery, you had castes, you have different tribes, and so it's not always fair, but in a way that's always solved through the water chief figure. And also, like I said, it's always connected to Islamic jurisprudence, and so there is no big issue in there.
Thank you. I appreciated your ethnographic details and observations, and I also appreciated your historic observations and sort of like bringing in what was happening in the past. You tried to fend off accusation of nostalgia, and you just said that this is not nostalgia. I'm going to accuse you of something else, actually. I'm going to accuse you of utopianism. Your notion of design is being presented totally independent of the economic realities that we really don't have any solution for, or actually you didn't offer us anything in terms of how are you going to bring these people back to a simple way of life in which resources are distributed more equitably, water is preserved, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking about changes that, whether there was a phase of colonialism or not, that are imposed by the new economic capitalist realities that the whole country is living in, the whole world is living in. So I am still not convinced by your design, because it is such a transcendental approach to it, because it does not really address you. I mean, in a sense, you want design to be espoused by a population that is decimated by economic problems, by migration. I'm sure actually a lot of the young people are leaving these oases and going somewhere else. So, I mean, there are problems that are not addressable by design. So you're offering us design as a way for us to almost like dream about possibilities.
Yeah,
that's my accusation.
That's exactly what I'm doing. So it's like, with these dystopian imaginaries we're having now of future, we need utopia, I think. And what design is about, it's about opening futures. It's reduced really always, I think, I would say usually reduced to commodity production process. It's always about producing an object or a space or a commodity. And this is the neoclassical economy capitalistic perspective on design that is reducing design to this. Design is a process. It's about imagining scenarios. It's about doing it together, not like in the traditional ways of doing design is me as a designer speculating for the communities and going this. It's about enabling speculation maybe. So what I did in Gebes, I couldn't show photos, is I went there with my bike, with my hat, from plot to plot, convincing the municipality, the activists that wouldn't stay in the same table, the farmers, the artisans, men, women, elders, youngsters. So because when elders talk, youngsters don't in the Oasis. And what I did for a month and a half is trying to convince them to gather on the same table and have a future workshop. And from that future workshop, thinking through the lens of commoning and commons, I wasn't giving like lessons to them or bringing something new. They know about commons. It's not something I don't need to explain all of it to these populations. Youngsters needed it, but they know about Wikipedia and new commons. So it enabled discussions, transgenerational discussions. Actually, in Gemini, it was really hard to find and meet women. And it was really hard to convince them to gather with men. And then I did, but then COVID came in. And I did because they didn't want to meet in the municipality. They didn't want to meet in the public space. They didn't want to meet in XYZ plot. At the end, they accepted to meet in the Dar Shabab, how can you say it? In
The youth
center. And so what we did in Gebes is developing scenarios. So we imagine the perfect future. It's not about imagining dystopic futures and then started with the problems to go and imagine other futures. It's about imagining the perfect future through this idea of connectivity and commoning, and then do a backcasting and have these objectives. And when activists from DUS and from Gbili knew about what I'm doing in Gebes and trying to do in Jimna, they were jealous. And they wanted me to do the same process in their Oases. So yes, it's about utopia and blocked imaginaries. The youngsters are leaving the country because of blocked imaginaries. Design is not only about producing commodities, it's a process, like I said, and it's being used into design for social innovation, but also design for public policies. And we're having design into citizen assemblies that are, because of the crisis of democracy in Europe and in the Western world in general, we have like these citizens trying to do politics in a different way with these citizens assemblies in a participatory way. And we talk about participatory democracy. I think design could be a common good in itself. Like the commoning in participatory design is having design used with grassroots movements, and you have also infrastructuring, the concept of infrastructuring in participatory design. It's about working with the state and public services. So it's a two-way thing. What I would love to do in the Oasis and Nefzawa is having these, maybe the observatory of Oasis, a sharing space where deciders, researchers, local communities, and activists would meet and think together about it. That's what I propose, yeah.
I'm glad I asked my question because that answer was needed in the lecture.
Okay, I will introduce it.
Thank you so much. You know, I was familiar with the work and talked about some aspects of it, and I'm of course completely on board with the idea of reprefiguration, though it's a novel. I actually wanted to ask you a question to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're thinking about doing for the rest of your time here. You were brave enough to volunteer to be one of the first, but you've just arrived here. So I know you're planning workshops, you're thinking about things to do. We have some of our students here. Can you tell us about what you want to do next?
So, like I said, when I went to Gemini, I discovered that as a product designer, I didn't have the skills to deal with that scale, not at all. And then at the GSD, thanks to Gareth, to Amy also, I discovered about landscape design and big scales in general, because here it's quite porous. There's no borders between design practices, and I like it. But also, I'm not the historian, I'm not the geographer, I'm not the GIS expert, not the climate scientist, all of this. And I think that being at MIT is an opportunity to have all these expert figures around a participatory workshop. And the idea is to explore the case of Nefzawa and the two key points I'm pointing in commons and connectivity, and to think how we could combine indigenous practices with modern technologies, low-tech solutions with high-tech solutions. So whenever we think about AI or Internet of Things or something like that, we think about green capitalism, green growth, and stuff like that. And I think it's only a tool. Like IoT could be capitalistic, or could be around commoning. So having these different figures and maybe one representative of the community back in Tunisia, starting something here, maybe have blueprints or prototypes or something to go back there and continue with the scenarios. Actually, the smart Oasis scenario isn't mine. It's a scenario we developed there. So I'm a bit frustrated that I cannot go back and work there. But then, like you said, there is an opportunity here, and then I can go back with something practical there.
Sorry,
yeah.
Can you tell us what do you mean by the smart Oasis scenario was developed there? Like, was this something that the community members or people around the table were asking for or talking about?
So we have like different scenarios we developed, but then one of them is the scenario of smart oasis, but it's not the only one. It's, for example, some people talked about the tansiqiyya. How do you say tansiqiyya in English? Like a governance group thing around an ethical charter on commons that would rebuild trust. So the thing is, for them, the problem of trust is the main problem. So if I'm going back to do commoning, I'm stupid because all the other neighbors are doing it. So how can we bring all of them to do this idea? And this idea of IoT, of smart objects, helping locals to monitor and know how much they're taken out, and etc., and also about the temperatures, all of these ideas. At the end, we developed this idea of a smart oasis where you have sensors for temperature, sensors for moisture, sensors for deep water, sensor for everything, but then around a figure like the water chief that is managing it differently. Maybe it could be AI, maybe it could be so. How can we do old with new ways of doing? And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.